doing a special episode. We have a guest, Tyler Ramsbey. I believe that's the correct pronunciation, right, Tyler?
You got it. Yeah, super excited to be here.
And Tyler is one of the busiest YouTubers that I've had the chance to watch. I know you do all kinds of stuff, and you have a day job, a family, a bunch of hobbies. Could you tell us a little bit about some projects that you're working on these days?
Yeah, and that's the tough thing is just balancing all of it. So for context, I do have a wife. I have two young kids, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. So anyone with young kids knows that, man, that's a full-time job in and of itself. In addition to that, I work full-time as a penetration tester. I'm a career or mid-level pen tester, and I do, man, every assessment type. So I see if I can get them all. I do web apps and APIs. I do internals and external pen tests. I do cloud stuff, AWS and Azure. I do mobile apps, both iOS and Android. I do some social engineering. There's probably some stuff I missed, but from the beginning, I started just doing web apps. So my philosophy was always, hey, they would say, hey, Tyler, can you do this? And my answer was always yes, even though I had no idea what I was doing because I had Google, I had Chat GPT. Later on, like you can figure it out. So that's my day job, and then yeah, I do the YouTube thing as well. So I have a small YouTube channel where I live stream throughout the week. Most of the time it's Wednesday nights. It's kind of my set time where I jump on stream and I just pick a random machine like the TryhackMe, Hack the Box, Pwn Labs, Portswigger, other platforms, and I just go through it live and share kind of my methodology as I stumble my way through it. So that's kind of who I am. As far as projects go, probably the biggest thing I've started recently is a community called Hack Smarter. We have a website at hacksmarter.org and a Discord community there. And that I think we have about 2,000 members there, but we offer like career coaching for people getting into the industry. But what's different about us based on a lot of organizations is everything we do, even on the coaching, it's donate what you can. So we just tell people donate to a nonprofit of your choice, and we'll sit down with you for one-on-one career coaching. So we don't have paywalls in front of anything that we do. We do everything free of charge as a way of giving back to the community.
That is super cool because I know that's not the approach that most YouTubers take. So really appreciate it for everyone out there who is either already in the field or looking to switch in. I recently just switched into pen testing myself.
Dude,
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank
How
you.
long have you been a pen tester now?
I've been a pen tester less than a year, but I've been practicing my CTFs for like 2+ years now, really putting a lot of time and energy in. And I've been checking out your channel and some live streams, and it's really inspiring. So thanks for putting in all that extra work on top of your normal work. I know that can be really hard. Like right now, it's almost 10 p.m. and you're here with me. So
It's the start of the night, dude. And hey, I'm curious. Let me ask you a question.
yeah,
You've been pen testing for a little less than a year now, but you do a lot of CTFs as well. I'm curious, when you started your role as a pen tester, what was the biggest difference for you between doing an actual pen test and doing a CTF? Like, what was the biggest surprise?
the biggest thing was that there's just way more data coming at you. And a lot of it is kind of not useful, but you have to learn to weed through all of that. And that's in a real life pen test. But in a CTF, it's usually it's less stuff on the website, and sometimes they're so simple that like the website is all fake except for the one place where you have to look into it, and it's
Yeah.
really nice when you're doing a CTF because it narrows your focus. But in the pen tests that I've done so far, they've been mostly external pen tests. There's just like all kinds of ports and services running stuff that I don't really know what they are. So I have to research each one, look into it a little bit, do like vulnerability scans, look into that. I use a combination of different tools and automated tools so I can get a little bit faster start because usually there's a time limit of 1 week or even less. Like I had one 2-day assignment once that was kind of hectic. And then the report writing is the huge difference. It's
Yeah.
that
A big thing
like,
people don't realize.
yeah. So in CTFs, you copy and paste the flags in and then you're done. But on the pen tests, you have to document every single finding and then explain to the client like what the business impact might be and how a hacker might actually use this vulnerability to exploit your own services. So that I
Yes.
found that to be like the big difference, but also the big challenge is that report writing piece that isn't usually practiced as much, I don't think, before going into the field.
Yes. That's awesome. That's cool to hear. And spot on with that. Even I think what surprises people with those externals is when I got into pen testing, did my first external, I'm thinking of a hack the box or try hack me, right? You have an IP, you're poking at it. But as you would know, for some of those externals, you might have 100 IPs in scope, sometimes even like 1,000 IPs in scope that you have to, really dig into, look for the low hanging bugs, see if you can exploit anything. But yeah, you're time limited, massive scope, and so it's getting used to that. So no, it's
Yeah.
interesting here. I had the same exact thoughts myself.
Yeah, and I've even had one that was just a single IP, but there were a whole bunch of subdomains, and that made the scope pretty wide, even though it seemed really narrow at first. But once I got into it, there was a lot to look at and to wade through. And another thing that's tricky is you get a lot of identical web services where it looks like the same portal, but it might not be. So you have to test them individually and keep them straight in your head and in your notes. And that can be a point that's easy to trip up on for me anyway. But I've
Yes,
learned a lot
absolutely.
from your note taking too, because you've been generous about showing that on screen, and that's helped me, I think, to just make sure that I'm using the same methodology every time I'm going through, so that I'm like writing a separate little entry for each port, and then I can go back over it and check for things I've missed. Yeah, because it's easy to get carried away sometimes, run down a rabbit hole, and then forget to check the obvious stuff.
That makes sense. And on your YouTube side of things, I've watched quite a few of your videos. You've been doing it for a while now, but why did you get started? Like I'm curious. You started making those CTF videos. Is it just like, hey, I want to share what I'm learning? Were you watching like IPSec? Like, why did you start personally making those videos?
So I come from a language teaching background. I was a Mandarin teacher for 7 years, and
Oh
before
wow,
that, I
cool.
taught ESL at K to 12s, and in China for a bit too. And so I always have had an interest in linguistics, and I've always been interested in computers and geeky stuff too, but I never fully embraced it. And when the pandemic hit, I started to consider new options for career paths. And I knew I loved computer stuff. So I started learning Python with a site called Finkster that's run by a German guy. And he's just a really good teacher. So I used his learning materials and just learned basic Python stuff. And I realized that it was fun, but it didn't really draw me into the point where I thought like I'm going to be a coder for the rest of my life. It just seemed kind of overwhelming, and grasping large chunks of code it's difficult, because you've got a lot of variables and a lot of different coding languages that all kind of interact with each other. And I through the Python, I came across some cybersecurity related stuff, and I found out about CTFs when I was asking friends in tech like what they might recommend. And cybersecurity just seemed like an exciting field for me to go into because it's so relevant to everybody. Pretty much everybody these days has part of their life online, and data is breached all the time. Like even I think AT&T got breached a few days ago.
Yeah,
And
massive breach.
yeah, so it just kind of called out to me. And then the CTFs were a cool way to basically sit around and play games. And instead of just like leveling up a character and then finishing a game, instead you're leveling up actual cybersecurity skills that could be used on the job. So it just seemed like a better way to spend my time, but it also brought in like the motivation that gaming gives me, and tracking stats as they increase and watching like on tryhackme, which was the platform I really landed on. I went from like being the worst player, like a new player, to in the top 1%. And it was really cool to watch that percentage when they used to show it go like down and down as the users also increased. They went from 2 million to 3 million users over the last year or so.
Yeah.
But that was a real rite of passage for me. And then I tried to do all of the learning pathways. And the videos were kind of just a secondary thing, where I was doing all this cool stuff alone in my house. and I wanted to find a way to show it off for me for the future, but also for potential employers. So really, it's been like
Yes.
a self promotion campaign so that I can send my YouTube link to anybody who might want to hire me and they can just check me out. They don't have to interview me about all the basic stuff because they can get a feel for where my level is just by dipping in and out of videos. So that's kind of the reasoning, but I think it also stems from my teaching background that I just enjoy the process of learning something and then teaching it right away. So like I think I don't fool everybody. I'm not a master at this stuff. A lot of times I just learned it like the same day or the day before, and then I turn around and I try to figure out how to explain it in sort of layman's terms. And that process
That's
has been
amazing.
really cool. And I made a bunch of DJ videos during the pandemic as a different hobby. I've got my DJ board over here. And it was a
You
lot
have
of
like a
fun.
hidden YouTube channel? Where's that YouTube channel at? I want to
Uh,
see you DJing.
I didn't do much video, but I did a lot of audio. I can share a link in the description to this video, but
Yeah, dude.
I have another code name for my DJ name is Civil Poodle, DJ Civil Poodle. And
Amazing.
I was focused on long form mixes, so like 1 to 2 hours of mixed music of various genres. But it was just a hobby in the pandemic that was fun. But it got me into like mixing audio and working with mics and a little bit of like audio editing and video editing. And that process was just really fun. So I kept doing it. But I switched to cybersecurity, and hopefully my quality has improved over time because I've tried to like just perfect things. Like each video is not perfect, but if you look at the progression, like the early ones are really rough, and hopefully they're better now. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Tyler, about pandemic hobbies as well. During the pandemic, did you pick up any new hobbies or routines that you still continue today?
Yeah, this whole job. So we have a very similar background in that way. So my journey into cybersecurity began actually when I was in high school. So I started, I think I was like 14, 13, 14 years old on this classic website called hackthissite.org. Did you ever go on Hack This Site? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Actually, I heard you mention it, and I went to the site, and I haven't gotten started yet, but I've saved
Still
it.
there.
I started my own Discord group recently. There's only like 40 some people on it so far, but
I'm one of those people.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I did a T-shirt giveaway recently, and I started making threads for each site that I think is cool and might have content in the future. So I put on Hack This Site, Hack the Box, TryHackme, Pwn Labs. That I know you're involved with them deeply as well. So I'd love to hear about that too.
Yes. Well, anyways, my journey was with Hack This Site, and it's still around. I don't know how like modern it is, but back then there was no such thing as TryHackme or Hack the Box or Pwn Labs or Portswigger. Like Hack This Site is, as far as I know, was one of the only platforms that taught hacking. But they were almost like it was founded by, I believe, Jeremy Hammond, if my memory serves me correct. And those in the hacker space knows that Jeremy Hammond was a big part of LulzSec and Anonymous. I think he just got out of prison actually, but really
Whoa.
unique, interesting person. But even hackthisite.org, they taught ethical hacking, but their definition of ethical hacking is um, do not use this to like steal money from people, but you can use this for social activism. So like in many ways, it's encouraging breaking the law. Like that's the hacker ethos, especially back in the day. But that's where I learned my hacking was on this like dark hackthisite.org website. And what me and my friend Nate would do, who's also a pen tester with me at the same company, oddly enough, but we would stay up all night on Hack the Site because we clearly didn't have lives, and we go to school the next day and just try out this random stuff on the school's computers. Nothing malicious, not trying to cause any damage, but we got our computer rights taken away. So I think for a full year, we could not touch a computer. We got called into like the office with the superintendent, the school resource officer, and our parents, and they basically said, "Yo, if you guys keep doing this, we're gonna press criminal charges." So I was like, well, that sucks, but that was where my interest was started, was in high school and just hacking and seeing what I could get into. But I didn't even pursue that as a career. So once I graduated from high school, I worked at Sam's Club, out of all places, as a supervisor. Ended up spending about 10 years working in the church world, got a master's of divinity, and was in that world for 10 years. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, kind of like you, um, my story is I was just burnt out from all the division and everything that was going on in the world. And to be honest, I was just like sick of dealing with people. And I was like, hey, I loved computers back in the day. I did IT stuff randomly on the side to pay the bills. I didn't make much money in ministry. So I had some IT skills, but I was like, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to figure out how to be a pen tester. But honestly, for me, it seemed like it wouldn't be possible. So for context, I live in a rural community. So I live in a town of 1,000 people. The biggest city near me is still 30 minutes away, and that's only about 150,000 people. So I live in South Dakota, and which there's nothing going on here. There's Black Hills InfoSec, but they're like 9 hours away from me, so I'm not even near them. But I wanted to be a pen tester. I wanted to hack for a living. Didn't see how I would get to that, but I started my first like full-time IT job in, I think it was 2021. I was an IT support specialist level 1. Was only in that role for about 5 months. Then I started working another place as an IT support manager, just based on some of my leadership skills. Went from that to a senior analyst at a bank, which was my first fully remote job. And then from that senior analyst role, landed my current role as a pen tester. So, dude, I haven't even been in the industry for that long, but my biggest pandemic change was this entire career. I changed jobs, changed kind of my focus, started my YouTube channel. So I think our journeys are very similar in that way. Like the pandemic caused both of us to jump into this field and see what would happen.
I wonder too if your background in the church helped because of all the public speaking that you were doing before, and you're obviously comfortable at the mic, like for hours at a time, and I feel like I am too, and that's all because of the teaching. Because I'm not an extrovert naturally, but like when I have something I'm excited about, I can talk about it.
Yeah, and that's a big thing I try to point out to people. Like highly technical, smart people are awesome, but often they suck at talking, which to be a pen tester, as you know, you're always interfacing with clients. You're having debrief meetings where you're talking through vulnerabilities. And even if you can do public speaking, if you can start a YouTube channel, if you can be on a podcast, I really think it does help you shine. It helps employers figure out your personality, recognize you're comfortable talking, and you get cool opportunities. Like even through YouTube, I've been able to sit down with like John Hammond, Heath Adams, Matt Kiley, like some of these bigger names in the field. But that's all just I took my previous experience of talking all the time and turned it into talking about hacking and cybersecurity, which is the same thing you did. So even for those
Yeah.
listening, like if you want to pivot into this field, even if you don't have a technical background, you have skills that transfer over. You just have to think creatively. How does your current background, how does your current skill set, how will that add to cyber, and how will that help you stand out?
Good tips. Yeah. I like to view the job search process as a CTF. So I think about my
Well,
targets.
that's nice,
Those are
dude.
like the companies that I would love to work at. And then as you get into a new field, you might do some volunteer work or some really low paid gigs. I think about that as kind of like the foothold, because then you have something to put on your resume and talk about. And then like your privilege escalation, that's when you get like the dream role, I guess. Or maybe it's
Dude,
when you
that's so
move
cool.
beyond Pentester. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of curious about like the role of project manager or scrum master, because that also involves a lot of communication and still in the pen testing world, but maybe not quite as technical, more coordination of teams. That at least that's how I understand it. Yeah. Do you
Dude, you
think?
should make a video. You should make a video about that, like
Yeah.
approaching the job search like a CTF. That's I've never heard it described that way. That's really cool. I
Yeah,
like that.
maybe I'll do that later. So about CTFs, I recently had the chance to play your own original CTF, Hack Smarter Security, and I'd made a tutorial, and so did you. Um, I'm curious about the process. What led you to have the idea to make one, and how was it? What would you like to share about that process of creating your own CTF?
Yeah, it was sort of a challenge I gave myself. So kind of like you, I love CTFs, love doing them, but there's there's aspects of CTFs I don't like. Now, this is just a personal preference. I don't think these challenges are bad, but some CTFs are not realistic. It's more of a puzzle, right? Here's like a string. You have to decrypt this string and then use steganography to pull some secret thing out of an image. Like, that's fun, but you're not doing that in a real pen test. You're not discovering that in the real world. It's just not realistic. So I personally don't like those kinds of CTFs. And I complain often on stream. In the beginning, I was like, this isn't realistic. You wouldn't do this in the real world. But I thought, I should just make my own CTF. Like, I should get one, see if I can get one published by TryHackMe. I'm good friends with Amoeba Man is his screen name, but Amoeba Man is on staff at TryHackMe. He's the one who created the Red Team Capstone network. He created all the AD network. So incredibly intelligent. He's the head of consultancy for MWR Cybersec. So he's like a pentest leader to like 30 or 40 other pentesters. So really smart, but makes way more realistic rooms for TryHackMe. So was talking to him about it and just thought, hey, let me dive into this. Let me see what I can do. So actually, Hack Smarter wasn't my first room. It was the first room to get approved. My first room was CyberLens, out of all things. And CyberLens, I'm looking at my calendar. CyberLens comes out in a week or 2 weeks on TryHackMe, so that will be an official Red Team Challenge room coming out. So I created CyberLens, I created Hack Smarter, and I have another room right now in the official QA, I think just about done with QA, called Silver Platter, which is based on CVEs I personally discovered and then published. So that's like overall the reason I want to dive into it. But the process of creating the CTFs, I learned a lot more by creating machines than I do by even working through them. So CyberLens, for example, my very first one, I have some exploits that are based on actual Rhino research, which is where I work. Like all of my CTFs, what's probably unique about them is I'm not just Googling for exploits. I'm using exploits that I know from personal research, either from the team I work for or like CVEs I have found. So all of my CTFs are based on original research in the field, which I think is different than other machines. And it's based on things we found in real world pen tests. And I try to make the attack pass a little more difficult, but not like a puzzle. It's realistic, it's logical, but in the process of creating it, so the first one, CyberLens, I thought I had everything working. I thought it was going well, but I used like a super old version of Windows Server just so I could spin things up. And I shared the first version of it with Discord, and right away, another Callie, my friend Callie Max, who's big on TryHackMe, I think it was him. He's like, dude, it's vulnerable to Eternal Blue. And he just quickly pwned my machine. And I'm like, well, good thing I'm not a sysadmin because that would suck. So then I learned, okay, when you're making these CTFs, you have to make them vulnerable, but you're only trying to make one attack path vulnerable. So yes, it's a vulnerable machine, but you have to put on your blue team hat because you have to harden all the other attack paths. So once a user gets initial access, you need to make sure that system is hardened so that the only way they can elevate their privileges is your intended path. So one of the things like TryHackMe checks in the QA process is not only does the machine work, but are there any unintended paths that are there that should be removed that make it too easy or too many rabbit holes. So making a CTF, you have to have your offensive security hat on, but you also have to have your blue team hat on. And then as a pen tester, as you know, when you do a debrief with the client, you have to explain to them, here's the vulnerability I found. Here are some suggested ways that you can remediate it or patch it. And I always did that in theory in a pen test, but now like I've created my own vulnerabilities and then been forced to patch my vulnerabilities. So I learned a lot just on both sides of the coin by making those CTFs.
That is awesome. And that makes me think about like code review in general. Like when you find a vulnerability, say on a web app in a CTF or a real life pen test, how do you like, what's your process to try to go about finding in the code, assuming you have access to it? Like where is that vulnerability in the code? What are some of the things you look for, like cues or tips?
Yeah, so when I do pen testing, at least web apps, generally it's a black box. I don't usually get access to the full source code. But the one place where I do is not even a pen test, but when I do security research. So I shared CVEs before. I have 9 CVEs or 0 days, whatever you want to call them. 8 of them were with one platform. I had 2 weeks, a 2 week break from doing assessment, so I had research time. And I just picked some open source software that was popular in Docker Hub and got 8 CVEs in that process. But that wasn't code review. That was just me finding it and submitting it to the team. The one that was unique is my ninth CVE. My most recent one was in Ghost CMS. Now, Ghost CMS is a pretty big content management system. It's used by OpenAI. It's used by Mozilla. I believe it's used by Apple for hosting blogs along those lines. So this is used by pretty major names. And I found stored cross-site scripting that allowed the lowest privilege user to become the owner of the entire tenant. So the highest privilege account via cross-site scripting. But the unique thing about this is I submitted to Go CMS, and they said, we don't see this as a valid attack path or something along those lines. But it definitely was a valid attack path. So I submitted to MITRE and explained my reasoning. MITRE agreed. They assigned the CVE. But as a general rule at Rhino, we don't release vulnerabilities with POCs at a full POC and everything with it unless there's a patch available. Well, Go CMS didn't want to patch it, so not only did I found the vulnerability, wrote the POC to exploit the vulnerability, I then went back into their code and found the spot where they were parsing the file upload. So the issue is they were accepting SVGs without sanitizing the SVG so you could execute JavaScript that way. So I had to do a pretty deep dive on the developer side of things to figure out how you could fix that. And I think I ended up using DOM Purify, if my memory serves me correct. But I had to find the code there just looking at, hey, where are these images being uploaded? Then I had to read a bunch of documentation and ask ChatGPT a bunch of questions because I'm not a developer on how the heck you sanitize this. And then I had to test it locally, make sure I stopped my own exploit working. Then I opened a pull request to Go CMS. Then we released the vulnerability and released not only the exploit, but the patch so people could apply the patch. And then even that vulnerability was featured on a podcast. It was like 0-day security or something, but they talked about, yeah, this is a legit exploit. Like, you should patch this. And the exploit author released a patch for it. So that's my only experience doing like full code review and patching things. But what that gave me an appreciation for is people who do have to patch things, people who maintain open source software or people who patch things in a company. I think as hackers or as pen testers, we just break something. We say, look, it's broken, just patch it. It's not that hard. I would challenge people, especially those who want to get CVEs, who are doing research in open source software. Don't just find the vulnerability, do the code review and submit a possible patch to patch it. And then you will realize it's not as easy as you think. And it gives you a little more sympathy for those on the blue team side of things when they have to patch the vulnerabilities, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really cool process of going the extra mile to put it all out there for people to keep people safe, but also to educate people learning about this. I know for me, cybersecurity has lots of terminology, lots of frameworks, lots of languages, and it is lots of tools. It's super overwhelming. And you just mentioned a whole bunch of things. Some of them I've heard of, some not. And I haven't actually had a chance to Google the term 0 days yet. But to me, it sounds like this is like something you found immediately after the software was released. Am I right on that guess or totally off base?
It's similar. So like a CVE, it's like common vulnerability and exposures or something. I don't remember what CVE stands for, but 0 days and CVEs kind of go hand in hand. So that's just like a vulnerability that I was the first person to discover this vulnerability in the piece of software. So it hasn't been disclosed and it hasn't been patched. So when you hear about 0 days and major software such as Outlook, that's what like threat actors are selling to nation state groups for millions of dollars because then those nation state groups are using that to attack other nations or to honestly abuse human rights much of the time and spy on journalists and things along those lines.
Yep.
So yeah, like I haven't found any crazy 0 days in that way that would like a nation state would buy it from me. I also wouldn't sell it to a nation state because I don't trust the nation states who are gonna use those vulnerabilities. But yeah, that's what those CVEs or 0 days are. Just I was the first person to find these vulnerabilities in open source software being used by thousands, sometimes millions of people or organizations, and then you report that vulnerability to them so they can patch it. And that you should always do that first because you shouldn't release details on a CVE or a 0 day until they've had a chance to patch it. Otherwise, you're literally taking a weapon, putting it in the hand of real threat actors, and they're going to abuse it. And you're at fault for not doing responsible disclosure, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that like anyone watching this video is trying to be an ethical hacker. Now, anyone can watch the video, right? So, like what Tyler just said, I think is super important because there are probably some malicious hackers watching YouTube videos too, and they're looking for POCs to try and fire off at their targets. And it's important to stay ethical and do it safely so that we can protect people with the work and protect business assets, etc. I've realized making these videos that the context is really important, and it's important not to skip the context because I've toyed with some short form videos like for YouTube Shorts and other platforms, and it's easy to let the context kind of slip away and focus on the exploit. And I did that once by accident. I was doing a CTF that involved it was hacking a Minecraft server to get remote code
Oh yeah, yeah, I know
execution.
what you're talking about.
And so I made like a little 45-second video of me hacking the Minecraft server, and it was banned immediately. And I realized like, wait a minute, I didn't even mention that this was a CTF. So like it was straight up just like showing people how to exploit, but without that really critical context of like, this is a practice environment, this is a POC, there's already a patch, and like anyone running the server should update to this patch. I just skipped all that. So um, that's my lesson learned. I'm just sharing with everyone. In the future, I'll try to really highlight context and security precautions for anyone running vulnerable software. It's usually
Yeah,
as
dude,
simple as just updating it, right?
it's super helpful to keep in mind. Like when I talked to John Hammond, this was in the beginning of the year, but he shared something similar. So he shared a story about when Print Nightmare was out. He released a POC for exploiting Print Nightmare, and he got a call from a company, or I don't know if they emailed him or called him, and they said, "Hey, our company was hacked, and we were looking at the logs, and your name was in our logs because a threat actor used his POC that had his name in it. So like a threat actor used his legit POC, and he even talks about how he's a lot more careful himself now about releasing those POCs for those 0 days until things have been patched. So it's a real thing. I don't think we think about often. Like we just want to, at least my perspective, I want to make fun videos. I want to teach people how to hack, and I want to teach people how to exploit stuff. But yeah, if you're not careful, those same powers that can be used for good can be used for great evil. So we do
Yeah,
need to be careful and think about the ethics of all that.
totally. Yeah, and it's a bit of a contradiction. I'm a huge fan of Kung Fu cinema, and there's always a training scene where the master is like, I will teach you, but only if you promise never to use violence. And then the student goes on to learn like all these violent methods, and then they use it at the end of the film to kill the bad guy. And it's used for good, I guess, but it's still used.
Yes,
So yeah, choose your actions wisely. I know we're
definitely.
almost out of time here for this interview, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about your work with Pwn Labs because I know that they're focused more on cloud-based pen testing, and I feel personally like this is the way of the future. Most of these like on-site server farms or even like off-site servers are probably going to go mostly to the cloud in the future with most businesses, probably especially small businesses that can't manage the infrastructure. So I feel like it's going to be a critical skill for anyone who wants to be a pen tester or already is a pen tester and wants to stay in the line of work. Do you think, are you on board with that idea too? Is it one of your main focuses going forward to improve your cloud pen testing skills?
Yeah, I don't know if it will be like everything is in the cloud, but we're definitely going to see more companies shift to the cloud. I think what we're going to have as companies balance this out. So if we go back to the beginning of cloud, a lot of companies did that. They like went complete from on-prem to the cloud thinking they would save money, which you can if you configure the cloud correctly, but if you do not, you're going to cost yourself more money. So I think what a lot of companies are realizing now is the best approach is a hybrid approach. So some
Mm.
resources are best for the cloud, some resources are best for on-prem. So I don't know if it's either or. It's probably both and. But I agree 100% to be effective as a pen tester, especially moving forward. And if you want some cooler opportunities, cloud is going to be a big thing to learn. In particular, I mean, you have a bunch of different cloud platforms, but you have really the three kings. You have AWS, which is the most popular one, Azure close behind, and then also GCP or Google Cloud Platform. So overall, yes, I agree.
Hmm. And with it's .io, right?
Yeah, PwnLabs.io.
PwnLabs.io it's a pretty new platform, I think, for kind of similar to TryHackMe and HackTheBox, but it's all cloud. And right now,
Yes.
TryHackMe has like a little module about AWS, but it costs $375. So like most people won't probably spring for that, but maybe companies will. But Pwn Labs is more affordable, I think, and has all kinds of free content as well. And I know
Yes.
recently you started working for them, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the story on that is PwnLabs.io, amazing platform. It was something I was looking for personally. I was doing some other platforms that are available, and the problem is either the cloud stuff was crazy expensive. So like try hack me, I did their entire AWS pathway. Even the 300 some dollars isn't even that expensive, honestly, for cloud training. But like Hack the Box, for example, I wanted to do their cloud training, but to do cloud training at Hack the Box, you need first an enterprise license, which was like $8,000 or $10,000, and then that's the only way you can get access to their enterprise level cloud stuff like Black Sky and things along those lines. And I was like, bro, my company is not going to pay for that. Like the company where I work for created CloudGoat, which is an open source um AWS that allows you to deploy vulnerable AWS stuff to teach AWS pen testing. Like we have that same stuff, but we do it for free, but it's open source. You have to do it on your own platform, and it's only AWS. But anyways, we can't justify that cost. And then the other platforms that I found that were more affordable just weren't realistic. Like the CTFs were just bad. They were like you do this one thing. It wasn't a realistic attack path. Almost feels like what probably the beginning days of your general CTFs were like. I discovered Pwn Labs on LinkedIn. So someone actually tagged me. They said, "Hey, here's some great cloud resources," and they shared my YouTube series where I worked through TryHackMe's entire AWS pathway. So kudos to TryHackMe. They gave me permission to live stream that entire pathway. So that's on my YouTube channel. But I was looking through the comments thinking, hey, are there any platforms I missed here? And someone recommended Pwn Labs. So I checked out Pwn Labs, and it was like a night and day difference from all the other platforms. So what Pwn Labs has is they have hands-on labs that cover red team and blue team, but they're super realistic, very much real world, and they cover AWS, Azure, and GCP. I think there's now 40 labs that are completely free. You can spin it all up. You don't host it all in your own infrastructure, but you can attack it, and it's that try hack me or hack the box style. You just click launch lab, and it launches it. But the other cool thing about it is you can approach the labs from a CTF perspective where you go into it blind. Otherwise, there's a full, very detailed written walkthrough for every single lab. So if you're brand new to cloud, you won't feel lost because you can just use it as like a learning lab as you work your way through it with those written descriptions. And I have a bunch of the videos on my YouTube page of me approaching it from a CTF perspective and just like trying to blindly work my way through it, falling into rabbit holes and learning along the way. So what I ended up doing is I started streaming some of their content, and I had a conversation with Ian Austin. Ian is the founder of Pwn Labs, and he was actually the head of content engineering at Hack the Box. So he was actually the one behind all of the Hack the Box enterprise cloud stuff. So uh, Pwn Labs has the same high quality you expect from like Hack the Box, but you have all the free labs. What really appealed to me is you can get a premium subscription for $200 for the entire year. That gives you access to every single lab, gives you access to their cyber range, which is Thunderdome, which is like a red team network that covers AWS, Azure, and GCP. Once again, simulating a real world enterprise environment. You have to work your way through all of that to get to the top of Thunderdome. So that's Pwn Labs. But I started making videos just sharing like I always do. Here's what I'm learning. Ian reached out and said, "Hey Tyler, do you want to like join our team on a more formal basis?" And I was like, "Sure, dude. Let's have this conversation." So I started as just a content creator for them, and I was doing everything I was doing before, just making walkthrough videos. But to be clear, I'm also a volunteer, so I'm not paid anything by Pwn Labs. They've offered to pay me a couple times now, and I tell Ian like, you keep the money. I want to see the platform grow. I get paid enough being an actual pen tester. Y'all don't need to pay me. I just want to do whatever I can to help the platform grow. But yeah, that is Pwn Labs in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I think the work that you're doing is going to bring a lot of new people into this field. Because I know right now there are a lot of people graduating with like computer science degrees and other kinds of degrees, but they're interested in going into pen testing. I guess it's one of the most like common desires in tech is like, I want to be a pen tester because you saw Mr. Robot, or you saw like some other movie about hackers, and hackers are cool. Um, but there's a pretty high learning curve and there's a lot to know. And cloud, to me, it kind of looms out there as something that's difficult. And I haven't gone to the effort yet of like jumping in all the way. And I think those walkthroughs that are available on pwnlabs.io are probably going to help people make that jump into it. Where if they didn't have step-by-step help, it's hard to get started because you don't know like how to write commands.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we should wrap up our interview here. Thanks so much, Tyler, for
Hey,
spending
thank
this
you.
time with us. And we mentioned a lot of names and platforms. I'll link all of those below in the description for anyone interested. There are just tons of resources for learning. So if you are a self-motivated learner, I think you can just go at it and get into this field, whether or not you have a computer science degree. Not strictly required. I don't have one. Do you have one, Tyler?
So I have a bachelor's in cybersecurity, but I agree, especially for pen testing jobs, no degrees aren't required. Certs are helpful,
Yeah.
research is helpful, but yeah,
Yeah,
spot
and,
on.
and I've learned a ton from TCM as well. That's Heath Adams, is it? He's
Yes.
the cyber mentor, or TCM, and their certification, the PNPT, for me was like a capstone after doing like a year or a year and a half of tryhackme, CTFs, and reading a lot of people's walkthroughs. I was able to pass the PNPT exam, and for me that was like the coolest thing that I've done. So I'm sure it's going to be the same way for a lot of you out there. And it's relatively cheap compared to like OSCP and some other options. We'll get into certifications another time, but I hope you enjoyed the chat today. And be sure to stay tuned for more cool content to come soon from Tyler. And I'll have some more stuff on the way at some point. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.